Good evening. Welcome everyone to our monthly meeting for November the, 16th. We have several speakers, I believe over 20 speakers tonight. The first item on the agenda is we'll do the welcome first, I guess, and then we'll go to the prayer and the pledge. Welcome to those who have signed up to speak tonight before the Board of Trustees, and thank you for your interest in Greenville County Schools. Before we begin, I will ask the Board Secretary to remind each speaker of the procedures we expect all guests to abide by tonight. Dr. Stiles, let's do that first.
As each speaker's name is called, he or she should proceed to the podium at the end of the board dais where there is a microphone and light system. Each speaker has up to 2 minutes to speak to the board. The light system will be green for the first minute and then will turn yellow when 1 minute remains. In keeping with board policy KCA, abusive language or personal attacks aimed at students or staff members will not be permitted. All speakers are expected to behave in an orderly and respectful manner. The board will not engage in discussion with the speaker or respond to comments. The superintendent will designate a member of the staff to respond to each speaker in an appropriate and timely manner.
Thank you, Dr. Stiles, and for other board members, I'm doing it a little differently tonight, so hang on. The next item, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and Mr. Lewis has a special introduction, and when we stand, we will remain standing for the prayer, which Dr. Stiles will do for us. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight's pledge is going to be led by Avery Hales, who is with Fisher Middle School. When I emailed Mr. Smith and asked him to help choose a student, he said it wasn't very difficult to choose one because Avery does the pledge nearly every day in the morning news, and so I appreciate her willingness to come here today. Avery particularly enjoys the A part of the school's STEM focus and has a real interest in video production and art. Also is goalie for her United Furman soccer team, and after completing her education aspires to be a fighter pilot. So we really appreciate her time tonight, and we'll have you lead us in the pledge.
Stand over it. Give a second. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dr. Stiles.
May we pray. Gracious God, we come to you tonight in the spirit and season of Thanksgiving. And as members of the Greenville County School Board and family, we thank you for the opportunity to serve our communities once again. We acknowledge that we have much to be thankful for in our roles. We thank you for our students, parents, teachers, administrators, faculty, and staff who all work tirelessly to ensure our students succeed. Moreover, we thank you for our superintendent and his staff who invest countless hours and sacrifice much to ensure our organization runs and operates smoothly. We ask that you bless each of those mentioned with a special measure of your grace, as well as quality time over the break to enjoy and serve their own families. Finally, we ask that you keep them safe in their travels and allow them to return renewed, rested, and eager to continue to serve our students. We ask these things in your holy name. Amen.
The first item on the agenda is the adoption of the consent calendar. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to accept. To approve. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no.
No.
Motion carries.
Did you say?
Next item on the agenda is appearance of visitors. We have, I believe, 20 visitors tonight. As I read your name off, would you please come to the podium? And tonight since we are over 15, we're going to allow 2 minutes each speaker. And the first speaker is Scott Power, and I'm not sure Matt Johnson also. Oh, okay, let's see who you are. Oh, you're getting ready to go down there?
My name's Scott Powell. I'm an architect with Craig Alden Davis, and I have with me Matt Johnson with Harper General Contractors. And we're here tonight to present to Mr. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Royster and Board of Trustees for working on the Roper Mountain Science Center Environmental Science Building. It was a pleasure. We had a great team, and the building turned out fantastic. So well, in fact, that it was received an honor award, which is the highest award given by the South Carolina chapter of the A4LE, which stands for the Association for Learning Environments, and their sole purpose is to recognize and develop quality spaces for children to learn. So this is quite an honor.
Thank you, Scott. And the facility also won an award of merit in K through 12 education for engineering, news, and record for the Southeast. There were over 800 submissions, and this fine facility won this award. So my wife and I picked this up for you from Orlando last week. So proud to bring it to you.
So we just want to thank the board and Dr. Royster for the emphasis that you put on providing wonderful facilities for our children. I know a lot of people probably take it for granted because they haven't been in other districts or other parts of the state, but thank you for your support.
Separate because they're two awards. Do two pictures.
Our next speaker will be Blake Brookshire.
Good evening, Dr. Royster and trustees of Greenville County School Board. My name is Blake Brookshire. I'm a physical therapist. I have 2 children currently in Greenville County Schools. I'm here to thank you for the emphasis GCS has placed this year on social emotional learning and the major investment in the Rethink Ed curriculum. SEL is the process through which all young people acquire and apply skills and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, feel and show empathy for others, and make responsible and caring decisions. Teaching our children these skills can help them to manage the anxieties that they have so they can focus on academic growth. Guidance counselors and teachers both at my child's school are grateful for the effective tools of Rethink Ed programming, as am I. To that, I am concerned and confused as to why SEL has been presented in this and other settings as related to the topic of critical race theory. This is actually a legal theory that has been around for decades to explore how racial disparities continue despite legislation such as the Civil Rights Act that removes significant barriers. Critical race theorists themselves assert that it is not something to be studied in the K through 12 curriculum and meant to be studied at a graduate level. Teachers will tell you it is actually not being taught in K through 12 schools as it is not part of the South Carolina curriculum standards. Therefore, what is it that many people are panicked over? I don't know. However, if you remove that from this discussion, it would seem that the issue to many is that the truth of our history and the Black experience in America is actually being considered, discussed, and brought to light. Confounding this legal theory with social emotional learning distracts and detracts from the good work our educators are trying to do with our children and from constructive discussions on race. Please let us focus on the needs of every child in Greenville County schools. Some may have more need and some may have less. May we be ever mindful of both and use all tools at our disposal, such as Rethink Ed, to do the very best we can to help each one succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brookshire. Next speaker is Judith Tenzola.
I'm Judith Tenzola, and I'm back. This is a nice, bright room. I could find something else to do tonight, but I am drawn here not as a rogue community member, but as a member who loves her community. Apparently, critical race theory is a problem, some with teachers, some with students, and some with parents. However, I do have an acceptable solution to your problems, though people don't want to let teachers and administrators know. People are concerned of their criticism of this theory, if we want to call it that. Therefore, I would like to offer, as a South Carolina notary, I will offer you in the school community that I will meet with any child, parent, teacher, or employee that has an issue with possible CRT or SEL curriculum, take down their observations without bias and notarize it. And I will then present it to you anonymously, respecting their wishes. I feel my pro bono offer will relieve some concerns that people have about not getting in trouble with their peers, teachers, or administrators. I will follow this vocal offer with a written one. I hope you will accept my offer. Now do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tenzola. Next speaker is Jeff Magg.
Good evening. How are you guys? It's good to see you. I'm going to make this short. I know tonight you're voting for the second time on the vaccine clinics, and I would highly discourage that from happening for many reasons. This is an endorsement by the school board if that happens. These vaccines are an emergency vaccine, or they're not an emergency vaccine, which makes it not even applicable to require those on the property grounds. So when Prisma's making money for every shot, it's a conflict of interest. They're making money for every shot they do, whether it's after school or not. On the school ground, the schools are for teaching subjects, not for getting into things that are vaccine related. Any of this stuff is crazy. There's all kinds of evidence from even the World Health Organization has said that they're requiring or they give if a student attends school, that's a automatic authorization to give a vaccine, and that's already happened in Colorado. And it's not happened here, I don't think, obviously, because we don't have that stuff in the school. But if it does happen, I don't know what's next, and I don't think anyone else does either. I would highly discourage having any of that stuff on the school grounds, either before school, after school, during school, because they are there to make money, and something's going to happen, and they're going to encourage people to take a vaccine that is not even a authorized and approved vaccine. None of the vaccines that we take in the U.S. are approved. So that completely eliminates the fact of why that should even happen. And there's all kinds of examples now of kids that are hurt because of the vaccine.
Thank you, Mr. Magg.
Anyway, thank you guys.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Our next speaker. The next speaker is Abraham Varugas. What was it? Varugas.
All right. Thank you, board. I'm new to this, so I know I've got 2 minutes. I prepared for 3 minutes, so I'm a little disappointed, as you can well see, but I'll do my best. I have a document here from the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge, IPAC, the legit group. And I want to read something from what they have stated. And it ties into the vaccine clinics. That's the reason why I'm up here. The CDC rules for data collection, published data, and statistical analysis are legally required to comply with the laws established by the Information Quality Act, IQA, enacted by Congress in December of 2000, as Section 515 of Public Law 106-554, which required by the Office of Management and Budget to provide policies, procedures, and guidance to federal agencies. I'm going to skip really fast because I don't have much time. The concern is what CDC has done in reporting data is inaccurate and illegal. Now, what we have done is we have taken what they have said and created policy, which is extremely dangerous. You guys and us all have the same motivation, which is for our children. All right, so I'm going to read some data here. Number one, CDC has violated their own federal law to provide wrongful information. Number two, research has shown that children are the least risk of getting COVID. 9%, sample size of 5.3 million. 1.7%, sample size of 240,000 hospitalized. Dying from COVID, 0.05% out of 150.
Thank you, sir.
Vaccine adverse report.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker, Sarah Merrill. Next speaker is Sarah Merrill.
My name is Sarah Merrill, and I am here to be a voice for teachers. I know many teachers that can't come be a voice themselves because their job is on the line or being threatened. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. That job has been given to us as parents. We are called to raise our children with the faith, morals, and foundations that we believe in. Teaching them truth is our responsibility. When our children are in your schools, your responsibility is to educate them. These social and emotional learning lessons that you are forcing teachers to teach is under the guise of critical race theory, and we do not want our children being taught these divisive, unethical, twisted views. Education should never be taught through the lens of race or sex. I have many teacher friends that have come that can't come with their voice, and it's sad that a teacher can't speak out. Specifically, a situation that my teacher's child was in a classroom, the SEL discussion question rose up identity, and this little girl raises her hand and says, oh, so today I can be a boy and tomorrow I can be a girl, and a teacher is not allowed to correct that. So when we're aware of this curriculum, are you aware of this curriculum, that it opens the door with progressive agenda to push non-traditional family values, as if something is wrong with the way that God made these children? Social emotional learning puts the mental well-being of our children at risk. It has no place in our education system. So why are you forcing these curriculums? And obviously parents continue to disapprove of these things. So have you yourself checked into the curriculums? Have you surveyed your teachers and asked them, when you brought this out this summer, did you ask your principals if they were comfortable with this? You know, our teachers, I'm scrambling because we have more time. I'm going to close with this. There are 6 things that the Lord hates. 7 are abomination: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. This is sowing discord among our school system.
Thank you, Ms. Merrill. Our next speaker is Susanna Saravia. Did I kill it?
Hello, everyone. I'm gonna say something that you heard, but I want to repeat it. COVID vaccine does not guarantee immunity. The COVID vaccine still spreads the disease. The COVID vaccine is experimental. The COVID vaccine causes damage to the DNA, and it won't repair, and it produces a death that it will come sooner than later. If we are guaranteed money, if we are granted money, federal money, or any money from anybody to do this, is coercion. We cannot excuse ourselves. Oh, I just was carrying out orders. I was very disturbed that in Anderson County, students were offered $100 to get a vaccine. And I brought a sign that in Ohio State, they give scholarships. Give your kid a shot and he's gonna get a scholarship. You know, in the Bible talks when people used to sacrifice their own children to their gods. That's what it is. And I want you to know that God today is speaking to you. God says, my son, my daughter, If sinners entice you, don't be persuaded. If they say, come with us, let us set an ambush and kill someone. Let us attack some innocent person just for fun. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, still healthy as they go down to the pit. We find all kinds of valuable property and fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot with us and we'll share our money. My son, my daughter, don't travel that road with them or set foot on their path because their feet run towards trouble and they hurry to commit murder. It is foolish to spread a net where any bird can see it, but they set an ambush to kill themselves. They attack their own lives. Such are the path of all who make profit dishonestly.
Thank you, Ms. Fuller.
The lives of those who received it.
Thank you, Ms. Fuller.
1:10-19.
Next speaker is Andrea Bruner. Oh, I did, didn't I? Mr. Fuller, I'm sorry. I left you out.
Good evening. My name is Roman Fuller. Ixnay on my ethnicity, which is Black African American and Native American. I'm here to present Power of Nine, which is a math application. As I begin to speak, I ask that you take part in the one-question quiz highlighted on the packet of information you have received. Power of Nine is a math application that involves the equation that has the emphasis of the number 9. Power of Nine is the product that my LLC offers, yet not the only service that we can provide. By finishing my internship with Between the Lines Sports, I am now a certified scout for athletics and will be able to put student athletes in the best positions to receive scholarships. Power of Nine involves math, arrow checking, and proofreading. Some may say we don't need education. My response is that may be true because just to name a president that did not attend college is Grover Cleveland. There are parents that did not receive higher education and still survive and maintain. My reason for the Power of Nine is to make education a priority and a desire. Power of Nine is applying under Regulation 19 for procurement interaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Now let's go to the next speaker, Andrea Bruner.
Good evening. I'm a mother of older children. I have a grandchild on the way. I'm not a speechwriter. I'm here as a freedom fighter for those who are being deceived and those who are unable to fight for themselves. I know what's going on here. I've been chosen for a time such as this. This is a war of good and evil and an agenda of population control. Having a mobile vax unit on school grounds is nothing more than a way to bypass consent. You are being paid off to set up shop on school grounds to bribe and shame children and their families into participating in Nuremberg 2.0. If you allow this, you are knowingly complicit. History will judge harshly those who look away while injustices are done to the vulnerable. Ask yourself, what does this lead to? Will you now have all access to every single student's health records? Are you going to know if they've had the shots or not? Will you be prepared for adverse reactions on site, even hours later? Where does this go after this? Will we need larger property for what could follow? Counselors sending their kids to the mobile fortune teller tent? Sex education teachers sending their kids to the experiment tent with mattress? Art teachers sending their kids to the tattoo tent? Will there be a baptismal tent also, or an abortion tent? Why don't you just concentrate on teaching the subjects so that we can get ahead of other states instead of nearly last among all the 50 states? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Berger. Our next speaker, Michael Brown.
All right, I'm going to be quick because we have 2 minutes. The first thing I'd like to say, and this is not being confrontational, is I think it would be very nice if everybody on the panel would pay attention to people speaking that signed up for instead of checking email on their phone while we're doing this, okay? Guys, a lot of people may say and talk about stuff that's going on in the world, and there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the world we're all concerned about. And as I tell my kids and people around me and friends, the world's a big place to try to change it, but you can change your world. Where you work, where you go to school, where you live, those things can be changed. So I want to talk to you tonight about things you can change. One of those things has been talked about several times, but I think it is worth the time to go through it again. You can, as a school board, refuse. You can refuse to have mobile vaccines set up at our schools in Greenville County. There are multiple places around every school in every community that these vaccines could be given out. Too much is still unknown. Too many kids are suffering from side effects or dying from this shot. If you open these clinics, you're not only opening the ways of peer pressure, but a legal liability to the schools, the district, the school board, possibly itself. If a kid gets sick and that happens on school property without a parent's permission, either by accident or forgery, and how many kids have ever signed a permission slip to go on a trip, or even signed their own report card and you thought it was from that parent? You are opening yourself up to something you don't want to be involved with. 27 states currently are suing OSHA and their president for this unconstitutional mandate. So it's not just a few parents here that showed up tonight out of bravery in Greenville County for our kids, but it's happening around the country. And last but not least, make your vote public. If you're going to vote for this, let us know who votes for it so we'll know who to vote for.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Our next speaker is Satu Rogers. Satu Rogers.
Good evening. COVID vaccination clinics for children are problematic for at least 3 reasons. 1, the risk of circumventing and violating parental consent is real, especially among young children who can't stand up for themselves, and among teenagers who, as we all know, are especially subject to peer pressure. 2nd, COVID vaccination clinics for children don't make sense. There is no COVID epidemic among children. A Johns Hopkins School of Medicine study of 48,000 children concluded that the COVID mortality rate for those under 18 without a pre-existing medical condition such as leukemia is 0. Put another way, there has been one death among children in the US that is truly due to COVID. Think about that. All the other so-called COVID deaths have been among children who had major comorbidities like leukemia. 3rd, this unnecessary and experimental shot carries with it a real risk of serious side effects. Studies published after the jabs were authorized for teenagers have shown that especially teenage boys may develop severe side effects such as heart inflammation. So while COVID is not an epidemic among children, there are some real epidemics, as you all know. Is the board considering pop-up mental clinics or other ways to urgently address kids' mental health problems? How about their phone addiction? Do we have pop-up clinics for that? What about childhood obesity? What is the board doing about that? Not to mention the epidemic of so many of our students falling further behind academically due to COVID. In sum, there is 0 need for these pop-up vaccination clinics for children, whether on school premises or anywhere, and 0 business for the school board to be involved with them. The board should be putting its resources and energy into real needs.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Next speaker is Suzanne Pickens.
Hey, thank y'all for being here and for providing this opportunity to hear from us. I want to start by reminding everyone that the number of children 5 to 11 who participated in the trial data for Pfizer to gain the EUA approval from the FDA was very limited, 4,647. And they were followed for 2 months safety follow-up. That's all it took to start rolling out these shots for a population that's largely unaffected by this virus. Many parents obviously have concerns, and rightfully so, given that this is a new class of vaccines, and there is no long-term safety data, as the shots have only been available to public for less than a year. The parents who do feel comfortable with the vaccine, and their children can go to their doctor or trusted healthcare facility just like we do the flu shot. What's not appropriate is mixing school with very personal and private decisions regarding the health of our children. I've never heard of the Greenville County School District setting up mobile flu shot units on school property before, so why would the COVID shot be any different, particularly for a medical intervention that's only approved under emergency use? The federal government has made vaccines free and available to anyone in the public who wishes to take it. Greenville County School District doesn't need to add that under their umbrella of services that they offer. It's time to stop blurring the lines between roles and responsibilities of the institutions in our community, and I entrust y'all, Greenville County School Districts, with educating my children. I entrust my pediatrician with their health care. Mobile vac sites on school property or any other kind of advertisement or conversation of the vaccines in the classroom will be seen as an endorsement. Given that the vaccine is still under emergency use when we know children are largely uninfected, I don't believe it makes sense for there to be a seeming endorsement of it from y'all. Our children are behind. As the parent of a 5th and 1st grader, I would love to see Greenville County School District put aside the distractions of COVID and let's prioritize getting them caught up. Thank you.
Ms. Coakley. Ms. Pickens, and the next speaker is Tanja Lynn Coakley.
Good afternoon. I would first like to thank the school board for allowing Prisma on the school campuses for COVID vaccination clinics. Schools should be safe for our children, and this vaccination is no different from other vaccinations that our children have taken. And Greenville has always been a forward-thinking district. And I say that because my parents reminded me of how they took a part of the cure for polio. But adults should not risk our children's lives just to satisfy their own political gain. So I think that, first, again, to thank you for allowing that to happen. And I think that we should do the best for our children and for the parents that they go home to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coakley. Our next speaker is Brett Brocato.
Thank you, Board. Anybody who thinks that these vaccines are just like most vaccines that have existed must not have any idea what the ingredients are. NBC News, June 10th, CDC.gov, November 9th. Since April 2021, increased cases of myocarditis and pericarditis, those are heart problems, have been reported in the United States after mRNA COVID-19 vaccinations, that's Pfizer and Moderna, particularly in adolescents and young adults. Yahoo News, November 9th. French health authorities advised against the use of Moderna for people under 30 after a nationwide study confirmed a risk of cardiac inflammation associated with mRNA vaccines. UK Daily Mail, October 9th. 29-year-old former Bachelor star Monique Morley, who is not as young or vulnerable as the people who would be near potential mobile vaccine clinics. She was hospitalized after her first Pfizer shot with heart complications. September 30th, European Journal of Epistemology. The trend line suggests that countries with higher percentages of population fully vaccinated against COVID-19 per 1 million people have no reduced infection of COVID-19. Higher percentage of vaccination in countries is not producing any reduced incidence of COVID-19 infection. Also appears at the county level to be no significant difference of COVID-19 with higher percentages of vaccination in the population. So right now there's near zero immigration or COVID controls at the southern border during this current administration. And any outbreaks that we have could easily be originating outside the country. I don't think there's any reason to try to counterbalance that with putting kids at risk from a vaccination that has, again, zero long-term testing. With the long-term risk of these new vaccines not being known for anybody, since the risk of a COVID infection for a child is minimal compared to the risk for anybody else, since the VAERS vaccine side effects database has 26,000 disabled, 18,000 heart problems.
Thank you, Mr. Brocato.
17,000 deaths.
Thank you, sir.
Bad idea.
Thank you. Next speaker is Kathleen Griffin.
Hi, thank you. I can't say any more than what's already been said here about these vaccine clinics. But I'm a couple notes here. So putting aside all the questions we have regarding the effects of this emergency use drug, I'm going to call it a drug because vaccines prevent you from getting a specific illness, and we know that that isn't the case. So putting aside the questions that parents may have, I'd have to ask the question, why would these vaccine clinics be on the facility? So one question, that one answer might be because the kids don't have access to this drug. And so why won't they have access to that drug? I mean, you can go to just about anywhere to buy toilet paper and there's a sign to get a shot, Walgreens, CVS, any supermarket even. And so then the question is, well then, for those children, are we worried about children that have parents that can't get them there to these facilities? I don't know how they get them groceries if they can't get them there, but certainly we want to be concerned about it. If that's the only reason, then the question I would ask is, why aren't you all sending notes back with the children to the parents to say, listen, if you're having trouble, we want to help you, and find out, rather than set up these sites where kids may be coerced or otherwise feel pressured to get these shots. So that's essentially where I'm at. I'm against it, and I just ask that you vote according to what's right for our kids. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Griffin. Our next speaker is Dr. Cristobal O'Connor.
Hello, friends, colleagues. Thank you for what you're doing, and I just want to say that you deserve respect for the time you spend in thoughtful consideration and study for making the best decisions that you can for the children of Greenville County. And even though I am very thankful to see the kind of community engagement that we have, I don't feel good about some of the really harsh, negative, threatening tone in some of the things. You know, you guys don't care about whether someone votes for you. You care about whether you do the best you can for the votes you've already got to be sitting here for children. So it doesn't really, those kinds of things don't shake you, shouldn't shake you. Doing the right thing should. There's a lot of misunderstanding, and I appreciate compassionate communication when we hear people angry, upset, critical, blaming, hostile. The question is, what do you need? You know, there are needs behind all of these concerns, and I thank you for always listening respectfully to the people who come with those concerns, even if they don't come with the same openness back to you. So the request that I had about an issue of concern, I will simply write to you, but I thought it was more important tonight to say thank you for what you're doing, and I trust you to do the right thing as a body, and I think we have a great school board, and we've worked hard to have that, and an outstanding administration. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. O'Connor. Okay, I'm going to struggle with this next name. Is it Tiffany? Walden Creek? Excuse me? Okay. Here's the next speaker.
Good evening. My name is Tiffany Glin. When my son asked us to go to school, my husband and I said, let me think about it. We were really considering homeschooling for the benefit of him, and I prefer homeschooling in general. My husband and I discussed it, and we felt a little bit uncomfortable with it, considering the climate of the public school systems these days, but we ultimately allowed him to go. Recently, my son's school hosted a fundraiser, and for fun, they decided to tape the principal to a flagpole. That's okay. I asked him if he felt like he wanted to participate, and he said, and I quote, "If everybody else is doing it, I should do it too." I do not want my 6-year-old, who like many others are at his age impressionable, to think that just because someone does something that I should too. In 2019, my high school, Punxsutawney Area High School in Pennsylvania, had a vaccine clinic for H1N1. Swine flu vaccine. No parent was informed beforehand, it just popped up one day. Being after an announcement over the PA system, many students took it, and shortly after, the school was let out early due to many students falling ill. After the vaccine, in Utah, a 5-year-old was given an adult dose of Pfizer vaccines. The mother reported nurses nonchalant about the mistake, not really caring. This will not be my child, and I do not co-parent with the government. Because of the current climate of the public schools, I will be pulling my son from public school. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, Ms. Coughlin. Next speaker, Courtney Epps. Courtney Epps.
My name is Courtney Epps. I do not have children in Greenville County School. I would never have a child inside of any school at this point today because of what has happened. My whole entire family they worked for public schools, and I am saddened by what I see every single day in schools today. My mother was murdered due to COVID protocol 2.5 months ago, and I do say she was murdered. Okay, just like the almost 800,000 people in this country who have been murdered due to remdesivir poisoning, and then on top of that, they're given morphine, which paralyzes their diaphragm, and they are murdered in the hospital. And I was given 30 minutes to see my mother for a fraudulent COVID PCR test that the emergency use authorization was taken away on July 28th. Why are we doing PCR tests? It makes no sense. So a vaccine mandate, my mother was only around vaccinated people. See, I don't allow vaccinated people to work for me. I have billboards up. It says no vax, no mask, no job. Perfect. We're hiring. The reason why is because I don't want my employees to get sick. Because I know based on this is a medical dictionary from 1934. It says that vaccines cause the disease. They communicate the disease. Okay? There's a machine here called a Valara that you can go get for $99 that'll keep you from having COVID, keep you from having mold or mildew or bacteria. It is proven, NASA certified. In 1962, it says the cancer was infectious. Well, guess what? The polio vaccine, and it said it caused cancer. It caused cancer, but they tried to tell us it was infectious. It was a virus. That was a lie. On top of that, you can read the truth about COVID. You can read Monumental Myths, and it will explain to you that no vaccine in the history of all vaccines have ever stopped us from getting any sort of sickness and disease. This is a straight up lie. And vaccine, per the FDA, its own vaccine advisory committee, announced that you were 6 times out of every five people died for every one person who was saved. 5 people died for every one person that was saved.
Thank you, Ms. Epps.
You need to read this book.
Thank you, Ms. Epps.
All the formaldehyde and the mercury and everything else.
Thank you, Ms. Epps. Thank you, Ms. Epps. Next speaker, Sarah Mag. Wow. Next speaker, Sarah Mag.
Hey, thanks for letting me speak. I'm going to talk about the proper vaccine administration to kids, especially that's very critical to ensure that vaccination is safe and effective, which we all know from numerous studies and data already eliminates the Pfizer shot. As a healthcare professional, we have to go through intense training and education on how to administer these shots. Is that being done in the mobile units? Guaranteed not. Did you know a minimum requirement to administer shots is an LPN? My question is, do we know the credentials of these people given the shots in the mobile units? How experienced are they? I know with the massive nursing shortage, who are these people that they are hiring? Here's what we need to go through. Every single time when I used to give immunizations to kids, this is what I have to go through with every parent, and that's not being done in the mobile units. This is what we need to do. Review their immunization history and screen any kind of adverse reactions that they have done. Is that, with the kids, did they have any kind of, we need to do screening on their, the past immunization history. That's not being done. Review their allergies. Do we have an ingredient list with the shot? No, we don't. Ask any doctors. They don't have the ingredient list. How do we know if the kid is allergic to something that's in the vaccine? Review, educate the patient. Are they being informed that they are, and it's an experimental shot, and that they are the experiments? Because FDA did mention that we won't know the effects of these kits till we see what happens to these kids. Prepare the vaccine. Do you know how much that takes to prepare the vaccine? You have to be so careful in doing that in order for no errors to be made. Errors can easily happen. Example, there was a kid that was given an adult dose. There was also a kid that was given the wrong shot. So with all of this,
Thank you, Ms. Mag.
being done, and the mobile unit,
Thank you, Ms. Mag.
we vote.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Ted Mays.
Board members, I've come to these meetings to try to find out. I've got 6 great-grandchildren in the Greenville County school system, and I've been coming to these meetings to try to find out what my 6 great-grandchildren are being taught. I want them to be competitive with other countries, China, Russia, North Korea. But all I have heard here is critical race theory, mass vaccinations. I'm here to hear about what my great-grandchildren are going to be taught. I realize that this is politics that we have here that we're talking about. And as far as the critical race theory, from what I see, 90-some% of the people don't even know what critical race theory is. And first of all, it's not being taught in Greenville County School and probably never will be. It is my understanding, well, you're going to let me talk now. It is my understanding that it's a college course. And as far as mass is concerned, people do have the right. They have the freedom. I spent 20-something years in the military. You have the freedom to not to choose to wear a mask if you like. So when you go to these doctors and have an operation or something, tell them you don't want to wear a mask. You don't care if they spread their virus into your wounds. And as far as vaccinations, when I entered the school system some 70 years ago in Greenville County, I had to take a vaccination. My parents didn't know what was in it. They didn't tell you what the ingredients were. They told you that you had to take a shot in order to enter the Greenville County school system to keep you from, not exactly preventing you from getting the disease, but to keep from spreading it to other kids. I heard people talk about, no, these vaccinations are not going to stop you from getting the disease, but we're hoping that they stop you from spreading it to someone else. And I'm very disappointed that that's all we hear.
Thank you, Mr. Mays.
Learning how to teach our children.
Thank you, Mr. Mays.
Somebody else.
Thank you, Mr. Mays. That concludes our speakers tonight. Next item on the agenda, 4.01, the superintendent's report. Dr. Royster.
Thank you, Mr. Meek. 2 items tonight. First, we'd like to introduce, although she was approved at a meeting earlier this month, the new Director of Strategic Engagement and Communications, Whitney Hanna. Whitney's here tonight. Many of you already know her, and I believe you have somebody there with you as well. If your husband, you want to introduce him as well? I'm glad to have both of you here tonight. Congratulations. Thank you. As has been the tradition for a number of years, superintendent's report in November has been the purpose has been to reflect on American Education Week. And for that period of time, there has been, I believe, no better way to reflect upon that than to hear from our Greenville County Schools Teacher of the Year. Ann Tromness is with us tonight. She's been a theater educator for over 20 years, a veteran actor and director. She regularly works in regional professional theater, in addition to her role as a drama instructor both for the Arms program and Theater Foundations teacher at the Fine Arts Center. She formerly served as Education Director at Greenville's Warehouse Theater, where she developed and implemented local and regional programming in theater education and community engagement, and built a nationally recognized Shakespeare touring program. She's taught at Christ Church Episcopal School, South Carolina Children's Theater, and for the Metropolitan Arts Council's Smart Arts program. For the past 6 summers, she has worked with the South Carolina GSAH and the South Carolina Arts Commission, developing Spark, a program using theater arts integration to boost literacy in elementary students in Williamsburg and Jasper counties in our state. In 2020, the program was recognized with a Research Initiative Award through the Art Schools Network and has since been expanded to a year-round program in additional districts statewide as a part of the South Carolina Arts Commission Arts Grows South Carolina initiative. We are most fortunate to have her teaching students every day in a classroom in Greenville County Schools. As you can see by the introduction, her reach is not only the generations that she served within our school system, but with students throughout the state of South Carolina, impacting their lives in a positive way. This time I'd like to introduce her, the Greenville County Schools 21-22 Teacher of the Year, Ann Tromdus.
Good evening. I am so grateful for the opportunity to speak with you this evening during American Education Week in my capacity as District Teacher of the Year for Greenville County Schools. I would first like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Royster, whose thoughtful and intentional leadership continues to distinguish this district as a model for many others, and whose primary focus on our students and inclusion of all who work in schools and education in consideration of policy and protocol do so much to empower us to face the daily challenges and to help our students prepare for their futures in education, career, and as citizens. Thank you for your service as a board. Your leadership in complicated, extraordinary times will also serve as a model for students, parents, employees, and community. There is so much at stake in the decisions you regularly make, and I appreciate your continued willingness to collaborate, to listen, to compromise, and to deliberate with your minds and your hearts. I rushed over here after my final class of the day, which ends at 6 p.m. It is an arms drama class, grades 6 through 8, and it brings together students from all over the county, united by their love for and potential in the art form of theater. If you visit a theater class, it can look a little different than a traditional classroom. It's a little louder, okay, a lot louder, and it may seem chaotic. But if you look closer, you might see some things that would surprise you. First, the students engage in a great variety of activities, from reflection and close reading of a text, to experimenting with vocal techniques, to investigating a character from the vantage of creative movement. They may be involved in writing a script, either independently or collaboratively. They may be researching an historical time period to give context to a character, scene, a costume, or a prop they are creating. They may be learning to negotiate a conflict in their group, or to stay focused on a creative task. These are all part of what happens in the theater classroom on a daily basis. But there's even more to the picture. I've been a theater artist for most of my life. I discovered my love for the art form when I was 7 years old and was fortunate enough to have teachers who saw that love in me and gave me opportunities to express myself through this form of storytelling, which is less about putting on the mask of a character than about revealing and deepening our own humanity and that of our audiences through communicating and connecting with the experiences of another. GCS has made an investment in arts education. We have wonderful programs for all grade levels, opportunities for students interested in the arts as electives, as avocations, and for those who wish to pursue them professionally. These investments are vital, especially in their diversity of purpose and in their rigor. But the return on this investment extends well beyond opening night, beyond the gallery or the final number in the concert. Investing in arts education goes towards educating the whole child, in teaching students accountability, engaging with social and emotional development, building collaborative and critical thinking skills, and embracing complexity. In almost every academic subject, you can find an activity or devise a lesson plan that addresses one of these skills. But the arts bring these important components of educating the whole child together organically and authentically by their very nature. We owe our students what the arts give them. We owe them the opportunity to work towards something that brings connection, laughter, tears. We owe them the complexities of human interactions and failings, the chance to explore stories of our humanity and sometimes inhumanity to one another, whether historical or fantastical. We owe them the opportunity to create beyond a screen, aspire beyond a rubric or test, and to engage their imaginations towards envisioning and building worlds together. And we owe them, especially now, some things that I see every day in my classroom: to learn with hope, engagement, empathy, joy. These are elements that sometimes feel rare in the challenging times we face, but by investing in arts education, a significant part of the return comes in the form of these most rare and essential resources, reflected in the faces of our students. And it is my hope and experience manifested in their lives as graduates and citizens. I thank you for your time.
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Meek.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, we'll go to 5.01, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report for the year ending June 30, 2021. The motion coming from the committee to hold does not need a second, is to accept the fiscal year 2021 draft Annual Comprehensive Financial Report as presented in order to meet the December 1st, 2021 deadline. But if there are any findings, significant deficiencies, or material weaknesses in the ESSER single audit following receipt of the revised guidance, the audit must be resubmitted for consideration by the board. Hearing a motion, is there any discussion? Ms. Wells.
And just to help me, since I wasn't here for the committee, the whole meeting, so we did something like this last year where we were kind of late in getting our ESSER audit completed. So is that audit going to come to the board automatically, or this motion seems to say that only if there's any findings? Will that come back to the board or not?
You have within the audit their draft ESSER audit. The federal government has not released the final guidance for auditing ESSER funds, although I don't believe our external auditor thinks at this point it will change appreciably. We did it this way, so if they have any material findings, material significant, the phrase that was used in the motion, which would be the findings that would be reported to you in any audit, that it would come back to you. If they don't find anything, it just stands as it's submitted. Because the difference in last year and this year, because we were under emergency order last year, the state superintendent had the authority to waive the statutory submission deadline of December 1. That authority no longer exists. So we must, to comply with state law, provide the audit to the State Department by December the 1st. And it is complete in all respects and final in all respects, except for the ESSER single audit, which, should there be some change in the audit guidance, could cause an additional finding, which would then come back to you. And then that draft that was submitted for the deadline would be amended.
Okay. So there were no significant findings, even with the ESSER funds at this point. So unless the guidance changes, then you would bring it back. But right now we feel like we've audited everything and have no significant findings of any of our funds that we've expended. That's correct. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The motion carries. Next item on the agenda is 5.02. That's the revision of board policy KG, use of school facilities. The motion is coming from, where did it go? Just a second, folks. Do we not have that?
That's the one that was in the docs and have Derek's changed to it.
Yep, there's not one there, is there? Well, that was changed. That's not the motion, though. That's not the motion.
So the motion was to amend it in accordance with Exhibit A.
The motion on the floor coming from the committee of the whole does not need a second, and it is in Exhibit A, which says that the administration of any vaccine that has received emergency use authorization and not full approval by the Food and Drug Administration is the amendment. Is there any discussion? Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Meek. Dr. Royster, just a few questions, because I know this topic has brought up a lot of questions and concerns. So if you could just help me clarify a few things. Has Prisma requested that we use our school sites to do mobile vaccine clinics this school year?
This school year, no, sir.
Has Bon Secours requested that we use our school sites this school year?
No, sir.
Has DHEC requested that we use our school sites this year?
Not specifically to this district. They put something out to districts all over the state, but we've received no request specific to us.
So the three providers who most likely would approach us about using our sites to provide as vaccine locations have not approached us.
That's correct.
Have we approached those providers about using our sites as mobile vaccine sites?
No, sir.
So we have no plans at this time, had no discussions, and have not been approached with anyone to use our schools this way. Is that
That is
correct? In the past, though, we have been correct, and we have had relationships with Prisma and Bon Secours and DHEC to administer vaccines on our school property. Is that?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
So I know one of those most recently was I think DHEC provided the H1N1 vaccine on our school property.
Now that's been 12, 13 years ago, seems like. I believe that was through DHEC. It was on school property at, I believe, 5 various locations after school was dismissed in 5 different geographic areas of the county, if I remember correctly.
How does DHEC choose those locations? Are they choosing where the most people are, or what do you think is the guidance DHEC is using?
If I recall correctly, the H1N1 had to do with just spreading them geographically throughout the county in locations convenient to people. I believe that we've also had Tdap vaccine clinics within the last several years. Right after that became a requirement for students to enter the 7th grade.
Okay.
And we had some of those, again, after school hours, and all of those with appropriate permission. And when they've utilized, like in the past summer when they utilized sites, they actually rented those sites from us for $1, thereby assuming the liability and the responsibility for the clinics that they operated. And they were operated by the particular hospital entity that executed the rental.
The H1N1, I know DHEC, I think you mentioned, chose those sites geographically. That part of that is because there are only a limited number of actual DHEC locations where the vaccine can be administered. Is that correct?
I think generally speaking, there is a DHEC facility in each county of the state. Perhaps there are counties with more than one. I don't know about here. I know there is one here.
When you think back to, I think, when the H1N1 vaccine was administered, were you superintendent? You were deputy superintendent.
I was deputy superintendent at the time.
Do you recall this idea that children were somehow coerced into receiving a vaccine, or that parents
They came with their, to the best of my recollection, in every instance, they came with their parents.
The parent accompanied the child to
Yes.
receive the vaccine, and so the person administering the vaccine was able to see that the parent had given consent for this child to receive the vaccine.
Yes.
We didn't vaccinate children during the school day.
No, sir.
And with TDAP, the same situation. Parents are involved in
Yes.
providing consent for the child to receive the
Yes.
vaccine.
And that would have been the case when we rented our facility. In fact, we placed that as a requirement on those who rented our facility. Whether or not they were compelled by law to do that, we required that for students that were underage, if they used our facility.
I can certainly understand the concerns that some of the board members have here, and I certainly would prefer that we didn't use our schools to provide vaccines, except that not everybody has access to vaccination sites. And I think it's easy to think about COVID and the number of sites that are available for a COVID vaccine and assume that those sites were available for the last vaccine, and they were not. A lot of the success around Operation Warp Speed, frankly, was that we were able to encourage a large number of vaccination sites in areas rather than relying on public health providers to do that for us. When you look at Greenville County, for example, there are 127 locations right now where you can get a COVID vaccine, but there are only 5 of them that are DHEC sites, and 3 of those are mobile sites, and 1 of those is in Easley. So of the 5 locations, only 1 is permanent, and the other 3 were created to kind of help with this emergency need for families to have access to vaccines if their children want them. When I think about the work that we do at First Steps and my day job, one of the areas that we spend a good deal of time working in is helping families have access to childcare and helping families have access to community services. And what we know as a district is that 20,000 of our kids ride the bus every morning. 20,000 of our kids ride the bus every morning. And we also know that when the buses aren't available to them, that many of those kids can't get to school. So we kind of build in this assumption that if we live in a community where most of the families in our neighborhood have cars, that everyone has access to cars. And that's not necessarily true. What we also find is that if you tend to think of things in terms of the car pickup line at your school, it's easy to forget about that not every family's in that line, as long as it may seem to take. It's not every family at that school. When we think about 20,000 students needing to have a bus to get them to school, and we think about 35,000 of our students being on free and reduced lunch, it really brings up some disparities between what we assume is available to all families and what is actually available to all families. It's easy to assume that a family can drive to a DHEC site if you assume they have a car, but if they need public transportation and they work 2 jobs, then that public transportation ends before they can get their ride back. If they need to walk to a location, the closest place they're likely to be able to get to is their school. We have used schools for food distribution. We have used schools for Wi-Fi distribution. We have used schools for voting locations. We have used schools as community sites in all of our neighborhoods because we want to ensure that families have access to those services that are readily available in other parts of the county and may not be as available for them. So it's important to me that we think about the fact that even though we can see where you could go to Walgreens or CVS today, this policy, as it's being proposed to be amended here, would prevent the next time that we need an emergency use authorization of a vaccine. And my concern isn't so much whether or not we have a place where we can distribute the COVID vaccine, because there are multiple places where they can get it. But my concern is that there will be a next time. And whether it was H1N1 10 years ago or Tdap or whatever the next vaccine that needs to be distributed is, if we don't make the same levels of investment that we made with COVID, then we're going to have significantly fewer locations for families to have access to these vaccines. And so for me, it's not so much about whether we can use this location today, because Prisma hasn't asked for it, DHEC hasn't asked for it, Bon Secours hasn't asked for it. My concern is that the next time DHEC needs us to do it, this policy, as it's written here, would prohibit us from doing that. And it would require us to suspend board policy in order to make an action that would benefit our community. I would be much more comfortable if we're going to start talking about families having a choice, that we not prohibit future boards from being able to make choices about future community needs based on some sort of political position today. For that reason, I propose a substitute motion which would include this clause. The board must approve in advance the use of schools or properties for the administration of any vaccine that has received emergency use authorization and not fully approved by the Food and Drug Administration. And I've sent that to each board member, and I think Nancy has a copy of it that can go up here. Before I make the motion, I want to speak to it for a second. We cannot assume that we know what's going to happen in our community 10, 20 years from now. We have, as a board, made bad policy in the past that was a knee-jerk reaction to a circumstance on the ground that we had to correct. The first thing that we have to do is we really have to think about the fact that when we think about like transportation, for example, and when we think about the decision that we made, 20 years ago, we made a decision to prohibit kids from having personal electronic devices. And part of that was in reaction to a desire to make sure that pagers were in our schools. Then when we start talking about looking at things that we need to look at, we need to make sure that kids have access to laptops and technology. And so the ability to really change policy based on a knee-jerk reaction didn't really work for us then. And I don't think it's really going to work for us here. The benefit for those who are opposed to the idea of this board ever administering a vaccine is that you're going to get guaranteed board control, because if this motion passes, it would require the board to actually come on record and vote to approve any emergency use authorization vaccine that's made available on school property every time that it's made available. So whether that is these 12 people or the next 12 people, they would have to come before the public and make that decision, which isn't the way that it is now. It also would require public notice, because any action this board takes has to be provided to the public. And so the idea that a family could be surprised to find out that a vaccine is being administered that day wouldn't happen, because we would have public notice of that. And for those who are really concerned about having access to vaccines, it allows the board to monitor and adjust. So today, we have not been asked by Prisma, Bon Secours, St. Francis to have a location where we can administer vaccines. And so we wouldn't be doing it today. But if Bon Secours, St. Francis, or Prisma came back to us and said, we do need this location, then it would allow the board to pivot rather than suspending board policy, which requires a higher voter threshold. So for that reason, I make the motion to amend this board policy as shown here.
I'll read that, Mr. Lewis.
So the amendment that's highlighted in yellow in 4 was already in board policy, in the revised motion that came before the COW. So the proposed change that I have made is highlighted as number 5. The board must approve in advance the use of schools or properties for the administration of any vaccine that has received emergency use authorization and is not fully approved by the Food and Drug Administration.
You're making that as a substitute motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second? Second. We have a substitute motion and a second. Any further discussion on the substitute motion? Ms. LaFentus-Wells.
I'm trying to understand why Mr. Lewis voted at the committee of the whole, and it was voted unanimously for the revision. And then right before I came to the meeting, he's come up with this substitute motion, which I find very interesting, why it's happening. Please let board members speak, and I know y'all have concerns, but just let us address.
Ms. LaVentus-Wells, continue, please.
I'm just trying to understand why all of a sudden there's this new substitute motion. I just don't see the purpose of what we're doing here. What we discussed at the committee of the whole for a period of time and came up with, the superintendent was in favor of it. He gave his blessing and said, no, I don't see a problem with it. And now we have this all of a sudden come up because Mr. Lewis does first steps and he feels that this, but I'd like, Dr. Royster, when we had the vaccine at the high schools for this past summer for, what was it? How old were they? 12 or what was the age? Please help me.
Eligibility was 12 and above, all right, Mr. Davey?
And where were these units?
They were parked in parking lots at 4 different high school locations after summer school sessions were out.
But they were on the premises, correct?
Yes.
So, and who was doing these?
I believe all of them were Prisma. Was one of them Bon Secours? All of them Prisma.
What you're saying is, what I heard you say is we didn't have these facilities on our premises before. So what was the problem? Well, we did.
Well, express
Well, we
comments
did.
to me.
And I just don't understand why all of a sudden we have changed from just a week ago to this right before this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaVentus-Wells. Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell.
I wasn't at the cow last week, and so when I saw this and I say, okay, why are we trying to change the policy that we have? Because when you look at providing our properties for these hospitals, for Prisma, Bon Secours, and they're all they are all not-for-profit. They're not-for-profit places that ask to use our properties. The reason why they ask to use our properties, and I'm looking at our most vulnerable populations that don't have transportation, have to walk to places. A lot of them don't even leave their communities to have access to, now parent choice is fine, and if you don't want your child to be vaccinated, that's on you. But if somebody does, why would we take away the option of having somewhere in their community where they can go to get the vaccine if they want to for their children? So when I came back, because I wasn't at Cal, I was wondering why are we even discussing this whenever Mr. Mays said, let us get back to the business of educating our children. If we looking at standards and looking at how our children are being educated, we're spending a lot of time on stuff like this that's taken away from that. It pains me with me being a retired educator, because we are focusing on other things that is taken away from what we should be doing, which is educating all 77,000 of our kids. So with this, with what Mr. Lewis said about access, I'm looking at access for our people that can't get to the CVS, can't get to, and if you've never had to ride public transportation, most people in here have cars. They have the transportation. You have to pay every time you get on transportation to go do that. And our schools are located in the communities for our most vulnerable populations to use. So I'm trying to understand why we are even trying to not allow these organizations to use our properties when we've had partnerships with these organizations for years. So that's why I'm listening to his substitute motion of the substitute motion that he made to have an option for our people. Because right now, as it stands, they wouldn't have any option. And parent choice is fine, and you can, if you want to get your child vaccinated, that's fine too. But those that want to get it vaccinated and can't get to those places, this would be another option for them.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell. And let me remind the board members that per my practice, I'm going to allow board members who have not spoken to speak first, and then I'll come back to you. Glenda, more than fair.
Thank you, Mr. Meeks. I've listened to the arguments. I have not been on my phone, and I take very good notes from each of you that have spoken every week that you come down. But I also know that all the information that you have is never all the information to be had. Therefore, I respect Mr. Lewis's substitute motion because what it seems as if he's trying to do, because one of the board members said that they did not understand. I also voted for this to go out of committee because I needed to contact the people who I represented. And this motion will give people on both sides a choice. If you do not want your children to take the vaccine, that is your choice. But if you do want your children to take the vaccine, you still should have a choice. In giving you that choice, I have also listened to the arguments, and especially the one about Prisma being for profit. And as I said, all the information that you have may not always be all the information that is to be had. So I'm going to read a statement that one of my constituents sent to me, and it says, Prisma Health is the largest not-for-profit health organization in South Carolina, formed by the merging of Palmetto Health and the Greenville Health Systems in 2017. Therefore, the comments that I've heard that we are doing this for profit, or Prisma is doing it for profit, this statement goes directly against that. So if that type of information is being shared with me tonight, then what else false information has been shared with me tonight when I take notes on everything people have said? So I do agree with Mr. Lewis, and people do have an opportunity to change their mind when they get additional information. This substitute motion, if we vote on this, will give people a chance, if anything new comes down, to have an opportunity to weigh the odds and really investigate, not just from knee-jerk reactions. Thank you, Mr. Meeks.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison-Farrell. Next speaker is Dr. Stiles.
I'd just like to say that I'm not in favor of the amended motion. We did spend a great deal of time in our CAL meeting discussing this. I know, Ms. Caldwell, you weren't here, but we did come to a consensus, and we all seemed to feel strongly about it at that time. And I just want my constituents to know that I continue to feel strongly about it. And I want you all to know that I served as a principal in Greenville County for 25 years. and I serve the most vulnerable students, and I embrace them, and I love them. And I think this has nothing to do with our most vulnerable students. As a matter of fact, I made it a priority when I was a principal. When I had a student who had a need, one of those vulnerable students, I reached out personally and got my counselor in the office. We reached out personally to community organizations, offered transportation, did everything that we could to support our most vulnerable students. So I want everyone in this room tonight to know that this has absolutely nothing to do with the most vulnerable students. And
Let's continue, folks.
I want to say this. A mobile vaccine unit is a mobile vaccine unit. And if they can bring that unit to the school, then they can carry it into the neighborhoods with the most vulnerable students. And that's what they should be doing. If that is their mission and that is their goal, there's nothing to prevent them from getting in their mobile unit. And that's what I would recommend, and that's what I would suggest, that they go into neighborhoods to serve our most vulnerable students. There is no reason for Greenville County schools to endorse a vaccine clinic when Prisma has the opportunity to go into these communities. So I am not in favor of the substitute motion. I felt like the initial motion was good, it was appropriate. I supported it then, I supported it now, and I am disappointed that we've had a change of plans tonight and that this amended motion came last minute, and I'm disappointed.
Thank you, Dr. Stiles. Let me remind, any more outbursts, and I'm going to ask you to leave. Thank you. Let me remind the board members that address your comments to me, okay, as chair. Thank you very much. Does anyone else want to speak that hasn't already spoken? Ms. Doolin. Okay.
Well, I have to agree. I'm also disappointed that we have to discuss a substitute motion because we have suspended or changed policies as things come up, and we could do that again, or a future board could do that again in 10 years if it was needed. I would like to address something that has come up about access for especially vulnerable children. And part of it is from personal experience in a previous job, but for the 20,000 children that we heard that ride the bus in the mornings and families may not have cars, a lot of those families also do have access to Medicaid, and Medicaid provides transportation for medical appointments for free. The Medicaid van will come to your door, pick you and your children up, take you to a pharmacy, a doctor's appointment, a hospital, wherever you need to go for free. It's not an ambulance, it's just make an appointment, the van will come get you. And so there's really no excuse to not have access, especially if there are over 100 places in the county to receive a vaccine. The other reason I don't think that we should have the board come back every time a clinic needs to be held to vote on it is because of what Mr. May said, and that will just take up more of the board's time when we should be focusing on education. So with that being said, I'd like to ask for a roll call vote.
We're not at that point just yet.
When it comes up, please.
I'll keep that in mind, thank you. Are you finished? You finished, Ms. Doolin?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Bush.
Yes, some of the questions that I had, I apologize. I was not here on Tuesday. I was ill and running a fever and thought it was best that I stay at home.
Your speaker on.
Yes, is it on? Yeah. I'm sorry, I apologize that I wasn't here for the committee of the whole. I did have questions because when I saw this, that was my first consideration was, has someone asked, or are we currently, other than what happened in the summer with Prisma and the 12 to 18-year-olds, that age student, have we been approached? I thought maybe I missed something. Have we been approached by DHEC or Prisma or Bon Secours? And I think that was answered earlier, that we have not been approached, and hopefully we are still on the downtick. The trend is that things are getting better, and so I agree with almost all of our speakers that were here tonight. I definitely agree that we have taken up way too much time and way too many resources away from our classroom and what our purpose here is about. And people, you know, I'm at the point where I don't even want to go in the grocery store anymore, because people walk up to me and when we get into this discussion, I had on either side of the spectrum, this is so torn apart, our community. And our district and our faculty. I mean, the children are even affected by it. Are you for a vaccine? Or are you against a vaccine? Are you for masks? Or are you against masks? And it should be. It always should be about choice. But then we come to, well, whose choice? If it's my choice, then we're not taking a side. But if it's not my choice, we are taking a side. And frankly, I'm tired of sides. I think that I had a grandmother that calls me, and she said,
Ms. Bush?
Yes.
Need to stay on the motion.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I am on I want to talk on the motion about the substitute. And about the,
I'm sorry, I love making you.
No, you're fine. You're fine. And I'm trying to place this motion into the aspect of the people that have contacted me and said, because I did receive those phone calls where people said, my older child got a Tdap vaccine. They lived up in Marietta. They were not, in case you haven't been through Marietta lately, there's not even a grocery store up there. There's not a CVS. There's not a Walgreens. I've heard some solutions here tonight, though, that maybe the next phone call I get, I can suggest that. But then I also heard, so I had as many people concerned about Tdap and being able to get a flu vaccine, and the Tdap because of just simply, one mother said, we couldn't afford to go to a pediatrician for the Tdap vaccine. So there's so much, this has caused so much fear and so much concern. And no matter how you vote tonight, you are either endorsing it or you are saying, just the opposite, that we don't endorse this vaccine. And it is not safe, because there's people that are going to get that by not doing this. And the bad part is nobody has even asked us. So I want to ask you, Dr. Royster, if this policy stays the same, if there is nothing done because no one has asked us to have clinics, no one has asked us to be on the property, and DHEC or Prisma, I know it has been our past practice, but I'm talking about the current climate that we have and the current downward trend of this virus, that if we leave our policy the same, which has served us well until we got into this deep hole that we just keep digging, if we don't change this policy, whether it's the original policy and that, thank goodness, that's why we have a week or 2 weeks. This time it was a short time. It was just a week, but that's why we structured our committee of the whole, so that people would have the time to talk to their constituents, hear from them, be able to do some research on their own and be able to come up with some different options and solutions. Dr. Royster, what would, if there is nothing done to this policy tonight, what would your, and DHEC approached you and said, we would like to have a COVID vaccine, or even a Tdap vaccine, you know, for that matter, in one of your schools or on one of your properties, what would your actions, could you tell us what your actions would be?
So if the policy stays the same, you don't change it in any way?
In any way.
We'd consider their request. We'd have some discussion with them about, are there other places you've looked to go that could still serve that community? If there weren't, then we would likely approve it. You may recall when Tdap first became a requirement, we had hundreds of students who were on the verge of being excluded from school. Yeah. And we approved those vaccine clinics to be held on our property, us not conducting them, but to be held on our property. So it was certainly advantageous to students at that point. If you pass the amendment that was discussed at the committee of the whole, doesn't affect the Tdap question or any other vaccine except the unauthorized vaccine, which would be that for those below the age of 12. In that instance, then the administration could not approve that, and it would require this body to waive its policy, which there's a requirement for how you go about doing that, either by giving specific notice X number of days in advance or a supermajority, either of those two methods. If you were to further amend the motion as was suggested tonight, it would simply change that last requirement to it would come to the board as a regular item, not a waiver of policy, and you would have to put it on your agenda. I believe, Mr. Webb, it would have to go to the committee of the whole, then to the board, or would it just go straight to the board?
It would still have to go to the committee of the whole.
Whereas a waiver of policy could come straight to the board with proper notice. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So those would be I think the answers to your three questions, if I tracked them correctly, Ms. Bush.
Okay, so the one that would give us the more advanced opportunity for discussion, community feedback, those type of things. But let me make sure I heard you again. This would not affect Tdap and anything else that's been FDA approved.
Those that are already fully authorized, approved vaccines, Tdap being a good example.
And the difference in the first one and the second one and the amendment is that one could go through faster.
Actually, the way it was proposed from the Cal to here
could go through.
Could it go through faster? I believe it requires, is it 3 days notice, Mr. Webb? But it could then go directly to a board meeting.
I believe it's 2, but
2 days notice. Whereas the amendment proposed tonight would require you to go through the Cal process, ordinarily a 2-week window, a couple of times due to holidays, a 1-week window, and then to the board. So it would be the more, I guess you could describe it as the more deliberative.
It would give us
process.
longer for, if we were approached, it would give us a longer process to be able to get feedback, to be able to get information. Then the first one could be just done like this time, we just had a week between. So there's a possibility that if we pass that first one, it could, you know.
If you accepted the First Amendment as stated,
yes,
it could, with 2 days' notice, be voted on, requiring only a simple majority of the board to waive the policy. without the 2 days' notice, it can be voted on, but it requires a supermajority.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Ms. Wells.
Before I start my other questions, I'm trying to make sure I understand. Is that because when we waive board policy, it has to come to the, I'm not understanding why one would have to come to the Cal and the other could come straight to the board in the way you described it. It seems to me like both of them, if they're in policy, could come, an action could come straight to the board meeting.
I think with a separate agenda item, if it would require, under BBC, there are certain things that could go straight to the board versus going to the committee of the whole. In the past, a suspension of policy regarding an item with advance notice has at times gone straight to the board, whereas there's a specific agenda item or a particular request, for example, for the board to consider, then there's an argument under BBC that, board policy BBC, that it would have to go to the committee of the whole first. But that's something I could study. It's an interesting question. I would have to review some policies to make sure that is indeed the process.
Yeah. I'd like to understand.
It's the idea between a standalone item
Right,
versus just simply suspending the policy. But in reality, let me just clarify sort of the difference between what was at the committee of the whole and the effect of this substitute motion is the substantive difference here would be that one would require the suspension of policy versus the substitute motion, which would require it go to the board for specific approval. So that's the key difference.
And the suspension of policy requires 2/3?
Well, without advance notice, that's correct. If there is advance notice, then it's a majority.
Majority.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I was not here for the committee of the whole either, which does not preclude me from deliberating. And I do think the work of the board and the way we have committee of the whole is advantageous, that we have an opportunity to talk about an item and then give it thought. I did listen to the committee of the whole audio so that I could be fully aware of kind of where my colleagues were coming from. In general, I don't like using board.
Ms. Wells, pull you back a little closer. Thank you. Thank you.
In general, I do not like using board policy to address some specific moment in time. And I feel like that's definitely what we're doing here. And, over the years, in the past, we've had other policies, probably a handful that you could point to and say, hey, why was this in here? Oh, well, see, that happened in 1980 something, and somebody had an issue, and that's why it's there. And we've kind of removed some of those because I want our policies to stand alone, to provide the direction that the district needs in a way that isn't politically motivated or driven. I don't like using broad policy to restrict use of public taxpayer-funded facilities by not-for-profit organizations that are providing crucial services based on some specific medical treatment that we don't agree with. The medical community has been a partner for Greenville County Schools in a major way. These health organizations have been side by side with us. When we identified the need for mental health services, they stepped up and wanted to be part of that. When we've had problems with nursing shortages, when we've needed advice about how to handle certain medically fragile students in our facilities so we could continue to deliver education, they provided that. Throughout COVID, I have said, I am not a medical professional. I think I'm really smart. I'm an engineer, right? But I'm not a medical professional. I'm not an educator. And so my role is one of governance, of listening thoughtfully to my community, to the administration, to my board members, and then being sure that what we do, the actions we take, support the ability of the district to continue to deliver educational services alongside our community. So, my concern is that some of my colleagues have stated that, well, by not disallowing the opportunity for vaccine clinics on our property, that we're taking a position. But if we restrict use of our facilities, as a medical community, a health organization might see fit to provide, and if we just say, no, we just don't believe that that's okay, you can't do that one, you can do this one, then all of a sudden we're in the business of trying to parse out what's good and bad medical interventions. And I don't think any of us here are qualified to do that. So,
Put it back on
I miss Cal, so I'm gonna do my best, but there's a lot to unpack.
Keep it on the motion.
Well, and the problem is, Mr. Meek, that there's a lot around this that people have said this motion is about, that it's not.
I understand that.
This motion is not about parent choice.
I understand that. Keep it back on motion as much as you can. I've gave you a little bit of leverage here.
It's not enough.
Sorry.
So in this policy, we say, and I got to think about this because I can talk about it as the amendment, or I can talk about it, I guess that's, if I get a chance to come back around and talk about the policy, I can do that. But I'll hit it now. You tell me if you want me to wait till the next round on the amendment, all right?
Work on the motions on the floor.
Okay. So with either of these, so even with this amendment, we have a policy that says the buildings and properties of the school district shall be available for community use, including partisan political events and meetings of nonprofit civic and service clubs, churches and religious organizations, and governmental agencies under those conditions prescribed or permitted by law in accordance with this policy. And so the broad reason for our policy is so that we can ensure that we have an opportunity for people to use our facilities, or the taxpayers pay for them, right? So I guess my concern with dialing in to this policy something where we're going to specifically limit something because there are people in the community who are concerned with what's being offered is that opens up the opportunity for another group of people to come and say, I don't really like that you're letting Boy Scouts use your facility. And I don't really like that you're letting the Good News Club use your facility. So I'm struggling with creating specific points of exclusion because of the concern I have about what it says more broadly about what this school board is willing to do in listening, and just say, we'll limit that. I mean, we've come out of, we had a long lawsuit with a group of individuals that wanted to be very restrictive in what we were going to allow our students to do with the American Humanist Association. I don't want to open up a Pandora's box in that way. So I guess I'm struggling with this amendment based on what Mr. Webb said, because I'm not seeing how it's that different from the motion that was on the floor in that way. So maybe if I could have either you, Mr. Meek, or our colleague that proposed the motion to help me better understand that difference, it would be helpful. And then I've got some other questions, but I can wait till we get to the main motion.
Well, Mr. Suddeth.
Mr. Webb, would you explain to me the substance of the original motion and the substance of the substitute motion that we have? Not just looking at what I'm going to vote on and not taking anything else into consideration. I'm just looking at what I'm going to vote on, which one of these I'm going to vote on. And so just explain to me briefly what they are, and don't put in committee of the whole, any time limits? Just tell me about what we're voting on.
Mr. Suddeth, what was before you this evening as a motion from the committee of the whole was an amendment to section 4 of policy KG, which in substantive terms added a line that said the administration of any vaccine that has received emergency use authorization and not full approval by the Food and Drug Administration. That would be included with other activities that would not be normally allowed on our campus, such as private social functions, regular commercial ventures, and regular business for profit. So that was the addition through what was brought before you this evening from the committee of the whole. There's been a substitute motion to add a separate section, number 5 in the policy, that would require the board to approve in advance any request for the administration of any vaccine that has been yet to be fully approved by the Food and Drug Administration.
Did the original motion include COVID-19?
No, sir, not by name. It uses the term a vaccine that has not received full approval by the Food and Drug Administration, and only those have received emergency
So it's
use.
not a vote involving COVID-19 at all?
Not specifically, sir.
All right, so it's a vote involving the vaccine that we have in the original motion as opposed to the vaccines that we have in the substitute motion. Now explain to me what the difference is.
Regarding, as it pertains to the vaccine, there's no difference, Mr. Sutter. It is still the terminology, whether it be in the amendment or the substitute motion, would be for those vaccines that have only received emergency use authorization and not full approval by the Food and Drug Administration.
And explain to me the difference between the motion and the substitute motion.
The motion from the committee of the whole would put it in policy that that essentially, without waiving the policy, that there would not be the administration of any vaccine by a third party using the facilities or school property that has not been fully approved by the Food and Drug Administration. Whereas the substitute motion before you that has been made at this meeting does not take that stance, but says that the board would have to approve it in advance. So any request would have to come to the Board of Trustees for consideration, discussion, review, and a vote.
So is it your understanding that the original motion said vaccines and had nothing to do with COVID-19?
It is the same language pertaining to only vaccines that have received emergency use authorization. So COVID-19 was not in the motion at the committee of the whole. COVID-19 is not being used this evening.
So I am not voting on COVID-19. I'm voting on vaccines.
You are voting, sir, on vaccines that have not been fully approved by the Food and Drug Administration.
Receive emergency use authorization.
Yes.
Is that in both of them? Both the motion and the substitute?
Yes, sir.
I still don't know what the difference is. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Suddeth. Is anyone else that has not spoken wish to speak? Hearing not, we'll go back around. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick clarification, because there was a question asked about the timing of these motions, and I just wanted to be able to provide some context. So in general, when this board considers action, the first thing that is submitted is a CAL agenda item request, and that was submitted on November the 2nd. And that CAL agenda item request initially said that can we amend KG to specifically exclude allowing COVID vaccine clinics on school properties. On November the 9th, when the CAL met, that action had been changed by the individuals who made the original CAL agenda item request to a different action item, which is the one that was originally approved at the November 9th Cal meeting. For those of you who weren't here and maybe don't recall, I chaired that section, and it is, I believe, an inappropriate action for the person who chairs a section to present a substitute motion while they are chairing the section. So I voted to move this item forward to the board so that it was the next available meeting where this board was meeting about this issue where I was not chair, which gave me the opportunity to revise or propose a revision to the item that was submitted to us on November the 9th. I also would like to be clear that it is not an unusual thing for this board to pass an item at the Cal, because that is when we have first heard the item, to bring it forward to the full board meeting, and for there to be a different vote or a different motion, because as has been indicated here, that provides that board member an opportunity to solicit feedback from their constituents, which I did. And I have a distribution list currently of 1,500 constituents who live in my district, including many people who email me with concerns for and against issues that I take. And I quite simply ask the question, do you support this board prohibiting the use of school facilities for vaccines that are approved under emergency use authorization into the future? And the answer that I got overwhelmingly was no, because we don't know what the next time we will need an emergency use authorization vaccine to be presented to students will be. And if this motion had been discussed more thoroughly in perhaps maybe a longer committee of the whole meeting, if this original motion had been discussed more thoroughly, say in a workshop, where all board members were given the same opportunity to provide input before a motion was brought to the board, if this original motion had been perhaps discussed more thoroughly in a committee meeting, which multiple board members have the authority to form a committee to look into this issue, then I would have brought those issues there. But they were not. They were brought directly to the Cal as a changed item from what appeared in board docs. And then we only had a week from there until here. And so if my timeline is rushed or compressed, it's because November's timeline is rushed and compressed. And we had 7 days from the first time we saw this proposal and acted on it till now. And quite frankly, it took 3 days to get the attorney and me on the same page on what the phrase needed to say to ensure that we can have emergency use authorization opportunities in the future, rather than passing what was the original policy, which prohibited that completely.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Ms. LaFentus-Wells. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Meek, I know this is very confusing for many, and I understand why Mr. Sudduth is confused on the wording of both of them. It causes confusion. When this was proposed, I too agree with many that we are not in the business of medicating our students. We're in the business of educating our students. I don't want, and this COVID epidemic prevented so much learning and so forth for the last year and a half, almost 2 years, because of the fear of it. And now we're dealing with the repercussions, and we're still allowing it to control what we're doing, which I find very annoying, because our students are the ones that we are sacrificing because of this indifference. It's not that we don't want them to get vaccinated if they want to. We are about choice. we did hear that the students that would be most vulnerable to needing the vaccine through Medicaid, Medicare could have that option for them. I just don't want peer pressure or the thought of a unit on our premises and everybody just go get vaccinated and go on to class. I don't want that. Let the parents have the option and talk to their physicians and let them go and have the vaccine wherever they need to go. I want to educate our students. I want our students in school. I want our focus in these meetings not to be about what we're going to do about COVID. I want it to be what we're doing about student achievement and where we are with closing the gap and where we are with what programs we're implementing, not on this stuff. It's time to move forward. It's time to ask the parents to do what's best for their children, of all children. And it's time for us to focus on education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leventis-Wells. Ms. Bush.
Yeah, yes, I have another question, but I want to clarify too, because it is very easy to be confused. When you look at both of these and you see, as Mr. Sudduth did, that they both say vaccines and they both say them, and so what is the difference? So I just wanted to clarify the difference in these two, besides the fact that one would go to the committee of the whole, and so procedural wise.
Well, and let me clarify that, because Dr. Royster asked me a question. I think I would be remiss if I didn't clarify this, that the timeline is indeed going to be the same for either.
Okay.
Either version would be the same, because the underlying question would be, what is the action that's being asked? And so unless it's those agenda items that can go straight to the board under BBC, it would still have to go to the committee of the whole. So one route is not faster than the other. They're the same.
Right.
Okay.
So the difference would be how many votes it would take.
And so to answer that question
The way
again,
the policy it would take.
If with advance notice, so if someone puts this on board docs as an agenda item, that is advance notice in writing, and so the suspension policy would just be a simple majority. If somebody tried to waive policy, for example, during a meeting, then it would be a 2/3 vote.
All right. Dr. Royster, I am relying on information that I have got, but I want to make sure that when we did that H1N1, when we did that flu vaccine, and I know our flu, that's why we take a flu vaccine every year, is because they develop it to address what, or as close as they can address what flu. So they vary from year to year. When there was that real big outbreak and we did the H1N1, are flu vaccines just like covered in FDA, or was that considered an experimental? Do you know if it was considered, would it have fallen? So say, just like Mr. Lewis said, if there was a really bad flu outbreak next year or 2 years, and the one for the H1N1 and the flu vaccine comes out, would it fall under this category of receiving emergency use authorization?
Gosh, that was 13
No,
like 13 years ago. So
I've had some people say that when it came out, it was emergency use.
I don't recall.
Okay. I just had some medical
I remember doing
people
them. I
that-
remember some of the locations where we had them. I remember some of that, but
Yeah,
I'd be afraid to try to recall that part.
some of the medical people that called me, contacted me, emailed me, said this would prevent the opportunity for a flu, for a H1N1. So I'm trying to think, if the board, if we pass this amendment, the board has control. You would not be able to have any kind of, anything that would be a partnership with any hospital system, with anyone, unless it came for board approval.
We would not be allowed under that policy without board approval to rent our facility, whether it's for $1 or $2 or whatever we charge for it for nonprofit, rent our facility, because generally speaking, these are parking lots. There's not any cost incurred for an unauthorized vaccine without it coming to the board for approval. And that normal route would be the committee of the whole and then to the regular board meeting, which in ordinary circumstances would be 2 weeks distance, and sometime, almost always in November it's 1 week, and in December it's 1 week. Sometimes in June it's 1 week. The rest of the time it's 2 weeks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Ms. Michelle Goodman Caldwell. I'm sorry, I forgot your name for a second.
Okay, I'm kind of confused now myself. But, Doug, on the exhibit on 4 where they have it in the yellow, all of that that's in the yellow, that is what's being changed?
That is what was proposed as a revision, and that was passed by the committee of the whole, brought to you tonight. So yes, that is the proposed amendment revision to this policy.
Okay, so that's the proposed amendment.
Which is different than the substitute motion.
And what Derek said in the substitute motion, just added that the board must approve it, right?
Must approve in advance, that's correct.
The board must approve it in advance, but the motion, administration, it's only about the emergency use authorization, right? It's about
Yes,
the
it
vaccines that
is.
only have the emergency use authorization and not fully approved. That's in both of them.
That is correct.
That's in
That
both
has
of
not
them.
changed.
But
Like-
the only difference is that with the substitute motion is saying that the board must approve it. So in the first amendment, the board doesn't have to approve it.
So in the First Amendment, the policy as proposed to be revised would say that the administration of any vaccine that only has emergency use authorization is prohibited in the same category as A, B, and C prior to that. So that it takes a stance that those vaccines that only have emergency use authorization cannot be administered. That's a stance. Put in number 4. Number 5, in contrast, says that the board must approve in advance any request for the administration of any vaccine that has not yet been fully approved by the Food and Drug Administration. So in one, you are taking a prohibition essentially, versus the other, the substitute motion, saying the board will review each request. So that's the difference.
Okay, so under the one that was passed through Cal, the board would not have to approve it. But with the substitute motion, the board would have to approve it.
The only way that the board could approve a vaccine as approved by the committee of the whole is you would have to suspend policy. It would have to get to you, suspend policy, and go that route, versus the substitute motion that essentially any request for a third party to administer a vaccine that has not been fully approved would go directly to you for consideration.
That's with the substitute
That's
motion.
correct.
But with this motion, we would have to suspend policy and vote on it.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I need.
Thank you. I have asked Superintendent to see if we could get both motions up on the board at the same time. Ms. Fitzer is working on that. That's the interference going on. Ms. Wells, go ahead.
So, Mr. Webb, since we're using these terms in our policy, could you define or describe the difference between the emergency use authorization and full approval by the FDA?
There is a different classification of approval that's administered by the Food and Drug Administration. One is emergency use authorization, and at a later date, after additional studies, would be the full approval.
So smaller sample size?
Typically.
And what other things happen to get from a EUA to a FDA approval?
I'm not a public health expert, though I've learned a lot over the last few years. But, I think time goes along with the sample size to see if any adverse effects or the effectiveness of a vaccine. A number of different factors are considered.
Can you quantify the risk difference in something that's got EUA versus FDA approval?
I could not, but perhaps a public health expert could.
Okay. So currently, we don't allow any medical treatment of students without parental consent, period.
Correct.
Correct? Because I keep hearing that, and I'm getting a little frustrated because,
Well, obviously, the only exception would be to render first aid.
right, emergency.
But no routine medical treatment without parental permission.
So all this conversation we're having, it's not about that we're conveying or eliminating what we've been conveying in terms of medical treatment for students, right? It's just, that's not part of this, okay. So I do think I understand, I believe the way I am reading this is the idea with the substitute motion is working to maybe a compromise or consensus to establish that because some folks have concerns about emergency use authorization vaccines, that we could have in policy an affirmative ability to allow that use with board approval, as opposed to total prohibition of it. So,
And I would say this, that it is technically prohibited unless the board approves it.
right, and I guess so that was going to get to my next question. So generally, I am trying to think of a time, Dr. Royster, when you have brought something. You generally follow board policy. So if board policy says this is what we're
Always.
I'm saying generally. Generally. I've been on the board 11 years. I'm going to say generally.
Generally always do that, yes, ma'am.
So I imagine that if the original agenda item passes, then in order for the board to suspend policy or to have that consideration, it would most likely have to originate from the board, and the board having some conversation with public health agencies or the like, as opposed to if it reads as a substitute motion. The substitute motion would still put it in your purview for people to ask you, for medical organization to say, hey, there's another SARS, there's another outbreak of something, a new flu that we think is particularly problematic, and we want to administer this vaccine that has emergency use they would come to you and then you could bring that. You'd be more likely to bring that to the board versus saying, no.
It really, to give you an example that's similar, it's like the difference between a lease or a rental. We do rentals all the time. You all have to approve a lease. So more than a year at a time has to come to the board because there's an established policy that addresses that and a procedure and a protocol that we follow to bring those things forward.
And similarly for the community, that would say to them, there is an avenue that they would follow.
It's an established avenue that it comes before this body.
And so that we couldn't answer the question about whether or not the H1N1 was an emergency use authorization?
I'd be afraid to try to recall that. I'm afraid I'd be wrong if I did. I usually remember things pretty well, but that's too long ago and too many medical terms in between.
Okay. Well, again, that's where I kind of get to. We're trying to drive something in policy that I'm not sure we all have we haven't really had a lot of opportunity to talk about it and vet it and think about the implications. That's why a lot of our deep policy work happened in a committee to be able to vet these things and answer these questions. So it's a little, it's difficult to think about making this decision in this format, but okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Mosley.
Thank you, Ms. Meek. I know it's late and I don't have a lot of extra to say. I wanted to listen to my colleagues. It's on. Can you hear it? Sorry. I wanted to listen to my colleagues and based on what we've heard here tonight, I think the original intent of my co-authoring this motion was to address the fact that this is such a polarizing and controversial topic. And so when I think back to this summer, just to give context to all of this, because there is a lot of misinformation out there, to give context to all of this, back this summer when we had the high school clinics, I received a lot of phone calls and messages about parental concerns, about what this meant. Are we mandating things? In fact, we had one phone blast go out from one of the sites that said parental consent was not required when in fact it was. And that was fortunately corrected, but that caused a big stir in my area because it happened to be one of the schools I represent. And so when the emergency use authorization was approved for the youngest group now, and let me state for the record, I am not anti-vax. I want anybody who wants the vaccination to have the vaccination. But when it was approved, I went back to the summer and realized how much angst that created within my community, and that's the people I represent. And so, understanding that we've done this historically, I think we can all agree that the pandemic has heightened things that we probably have never thought about before. It's just heightened, whatever it is. It's brought things to our attention. We all of a sudden have parents engaging and paying closer attention to what we do within the school, what our healthcare providers are doing within the community. I mean, that's just the fact of this pandemic. And so maybe my naivety was to suggest, let's eliminate controversy, which apparently it's caused more, or I should say caused more confusion, but let's just stay in the business of educating our students. And I'm speaking to all of you because I've heard all of you tonight. Let's just stay in the business of educating our students and allow our families to make their private medical decisions outside of our walls. That was the only intent here. There's no hidden agenda. There's no hidden, and I limited, and my limiting to emergency youth authorization was for that reason as well, because I don't think there's a ton of controversy around something that's gone through the entire approval process. And I worry about liability. I worry about, because we are in uncharted territory, and is this going to come back around and somehow affect us? Because we don't know. So there's just a lot of unknowns. And I guess to err on the side of caution, I just felt like it was just better for us to not be distracted by private medical decisions that were being made and just let us focus on education. So that's all I wanted to say about it. I wanted to provide a little context for the origination of this. And I do regret there's a lot of misunderstanding. But I felt like I was representing the many concerns that have been brought to me over the last several months. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mosley. Anyone else? Hearing none, we are at the point to vote on this motion. Ms. Doolan, you still want a roll call?
Yes, please.
Ms. Stokes, please call the roll.
I'm so sorry. Can I ask a Robert's Rule of Order question really quick?
Sure.
Okay. I'm sorry. And I know, Doug, you've said this 3 times, but I'm going to ask you one more time. If the policy's amended, first of all, I'm confused about what we're even voting on at this point, but either path goes through the same process for the future. Board waiving of a policy, or.
So your first question is, the first item in order is the substitute motion. Mr. Lewis's substitute motion, that's what you will be voting on immediately.
Okay.
But to answer your other question is, both would have the same timeline for approval process, whether it be the amended motion that was passed by the committee of the whole, or this substitute motion would have the same timeline for approval. One would require suspension of policy, perhaps additional notice requirements as far as voting that would have to be met. But once that happens, it would still have that same timeline.
Okay, so we're voting on Mr. Lewis's motion. Then
Substitute
what?
motion.
Then what? If it passes, it replaces the motion?
Then you would vote on that as the underlying, you would vote on it twice.
Okay.
If it doesn't pass, then it would be back to the original amended motion.
Okay, thank you. I needed some point of clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mosley. Any further clarification, anybody? Hearing none. Ms. Stokes, now call the roll, please.
Mrs. Bush.
Yes.
Mrs. Doolin.
No.
Mrs. Goodwin Caldwell.
Yes.
Mrs. Leventis Wells.
No.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Mrs. Morrison Fair.
Yes.
Mrs. Mosley.
No.
Dr. Stiles. No. Mr. Suddeth.
No.
Mrs. Wells.
Yes.
And Mr. Meek.
Yes.
6 yes, 4 no.
The motion carries. The substitute motion is now the main motion on the floor.
Wait a minute. Sorry.
Excuse me?
5 no's. Sorry.
5 no's.
6 yes,
yeses.
5 no.
Thank you. The motion still carries.
Didn't know
Now that is the main motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Ms. Bush?
Yes, I just want to clarify, because it seems even as long as we have discussed this, that this incorporates the original motion. And the only thing it adds is that the board must vote. So the board.
So let me attempt to put this to bed and clarify again and emphasize what this does is that any request to administer vaccines that have not been fully approved by the FDA must go to you first for approval and consideration.
Good.
I just wanted to make sure it would have to come to the board.
That is correct. Otherwise, emergency use authorization vaccinations will not be administered by third parties.
And that's the first, that was the one that we just, so it does include that first part, that emergency use and.
Yes, same emergency use authorization and not fully approved by the FDA. That remains the same. The key difference is the avenue to you directly for consideration of each individual request.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. The motion's on the floor. Ms. LaFentus Wells.
I like to table.
Make a motion to table.
Yes, sir.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. It is not debatable. Linda and Sarah. It is not debatable, so do you want a roll call?
Mr. Chairman. Sure. Just for the benefit of the newer board members in the audience, can you just describe what the motion to table would in fact do to this act?
The motion to table is just what it says it would do. It would put it on the table. It basically would kill the motion unless it gets brought off, and it hardly ever, if ever, gets brought off the table. No, there's no discussion on the motion. No discussion. Okay. Point of order? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Clarification.
Okay.
So it would table this that we just voted on, would it table the whole thing?
Yes, ma'am. Do you want a roll call? Ms. Stokes, roll call, please.
Mrs. Bush?
No.
Mrs. Doolin? Yes. Mrs. Goodwin Cowell?
No.
Mrs. LaVentus Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mrs. Morrison Fair?
No.
Mrs. Mosley?
I'm really confused. I'm sorry. What? Yes?
It's not debatable. No, ma'am. Yes or no? Do you want to pass? And I'll come back to you.
It kills the motion. Point of order here. Does it kill the motion and it goes back to the policy and we have no oversight and all? I'm just confused.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Okay, your vote?
You better go no.
Ms. Stokes, go ahead.
We could bring it back.
Dr. Stiles?
The next cow. We could bring it back. The next cow.
I pass.
Mr. Suddeth?
Yes.
Mrs. Wells?
Yes.
Mrs. Mosley?
Ms. Mosley?
Ms. Mosley?
Yes or no?
Yes. Sorry.
Dr. Stiles?
I pass.
She passed.
Okay, Mr. Meek?
Abstain.
Yes.
You abstain? Is that, we should, okay. Mr. Meek?
Yes.
Six yes, 4 no, 1 abstain.
Motion is tabled.
Mr. Meek?
Ms. LaVentus Wells.
So we could, when the committee of the whole comes back, we could put this on the agenda?
Lewis?
Mr. Webb, is there a time limit?
I would have to look into that more. But yeah, typically there would be a vote to take it from the table instead of just one member putting it on as a agenda item. But I will research that.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Next item on the agenda is 5.03, selection for the indefinite delivery for mechanical engineer design services. We discussed it. Y'all be quiet. Get this over with here. Let me find the item. The motion coming from the committee of the whole was to approve the highest ranking 5 firms for the mechanical engineer design services in an indefinite delivery contract format. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. 5.04, recommended motion from the administration. I need a maker. Ms. Doolin.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the physical education exemption for one student at Malden Middle School.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda, 6.01, committee liaison reports. Do we have anyone wish to make a report tonight? Hearing none, we'll move along to 7.01, monthly finance report. Dr. Oyster.
Mr. Stack, do you have any particular item to highlight to the board? The financial reports included. I know you'll answer any question they might have.
No, sir, there's nothing unexpected in the reports through September.
Any questions from the board? Hearing none, that reaches the end of our agenda. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
To adjourn.
Hold on, just one of you. Ms. Wells,
Motion to adjourn.
we have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.